your hands, and anything that gets on your hair makes it pretty.
You'd think it would make it. I don't hear you. Hi.
Good morning. Bobcats are wary and opportunistic predators who inhabit much of southern Canada, the United States, and Mexico. It's also quite possible that they live in your neighborhood. They are North America's most common native wild feline. This is Mike Fitz, resident naturalist with explore.org, the world's largest live nature cam network. Bobcats are the topic of today's live chat, and to help me learn more about these elusive animals, I'm joined by Carole Baskin and Jamie Veronica from Big Cat Rescue in Tampa, Florida. They do a lot of work to rehabilitate and release injured, orphaned, and other bobcats that need some help back into the wild. So we're going to learn a lot about bobcats today and their rehab efforts. So Jamie, Carole, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Mike, for having us, and thank you to everybody at Explore for keeping those cameras on the cats, because we've learned more about bobcats, I think, since you guys have been manning the cameras than in all of the years prior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really given, I think, everybody some really wonderful insight into the behavior, especially right now with that bobcat family that you are caring for. And for anyone who's watching on explore.org or wherever else you happen to be, if you do have questions for Jamie and Carole, please submit those in the comments below the live cam feed on explore.org, and a helpful moderator will send those questions in my direction, and we'll do our best to try to answer those for you. I think I wanted to start out, however, by asking you just if you could just tell us a little bit about Big Cat Rescue and its mission.
I had done bobcat rehab and release since I was 17, but we started rescuing exotic animals, exotic cats that people had as fur farm animals back in 1992. We bought out 3 different fur farms of all of the cats that they had between 92 and 95, and essentially put an end to cats being killed for their fur in this country. And we were working to get them out of Canada, but never were able to finish that. We rescue lions and tigers and leopards from people that get them as pets, or from circuses, or from all kinds of different horrible situations, and we give them a permanent home. But I think the bobcat rehab part of the work that we do is probably what gives our hearts the most pleasure, because those cats can actually be set free, and that's what we want. We want a world where all big cats live free.
It does seem like a very rewarding and difficult job. Before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts about how you rehabilitate the bobcats, maybe we could talk about the animal itself. They're really widespread. They live basically in almost every part of the United States outside of Alaska and Hawaii, and like the island territories scattered around the Pacific and Atlantic. So if you were to describe a bobcat to maybe someone who's not familiar to them, what would be their distinguishing physical characteristics? To their range, but I actually read one of the largest bobcats on record was a male who weighed check my notes here to get this right. 17.6 kilograms, and that's if you multiply that into or convert that into pounds, that's like a 40-pound cat. So they can be quite big from time to time.
Yeah, here in Florida, they're much smaller. They are typically 20 pounds at their largest, but the more north you go, the bigger that they get.
And what about their food? So I think their diet is very diverse depending on where they happen to live. But could you maybe generalize about what types of food or prey they might be seeking in the wild?
Mainly, the bobcats are going to be eating small prey animals like rats, snakes. They'll even eat lizards and bugs. But some of those bigger bobcats up north have been seen on camera traps taking down deer. So it is a huge variety of animals from south to north that comprise their diet.
And just like a house cat too, they're basically like a generalist carnivore. So they're going to eat what they can catch. That's an animal. I think a couple years ago or so, or maybe last year, there was some video that somebody took on a beach in Florida of a bobcat going into the surf and actually catching like a small dogfish or something like that. So that was quite fascinating to see. And in my part of North America, my neck of the woods in Western Washington, where I am right now, there's a small rodent that maybe many people aren't familiar with called the mountain beaver. Their genus is Aplodontia, so you can look that up. They're not related really closely to true beavers, but that constitutes a big part of their diet out here. So they'll take what they can get: hares, rabbits, and like you said, rats, anything that really is kind of abundant prey in their area. Mm-hmm. And then you are caring right now for a family of bobcats. So before we get into the specifics of how you're doing that, can you tell us just a little bit about the reproductive habits of bobcats? When does their mating season occur? Maybe how long does it take to raise kittens?
It seems to range as far as the breeding season because we get orphans throughout the year. But typically
it's always spring here.
We have, mild weather all year round, so it might vary differently the more north you go. But for as far as like kittens staying with the mother, they'll stay with them for a year to a year and a half to get their bearings, to set up their own territories, to learn how to hunt. And so that's one of the things that this new family that we've been watching has been so helpful with us in developing our program for the orphan bobcats that we get, because we can actually observe firsthand everything that the mother does to teach their kittens along the way.
Just this morning, she was teaching them how to jump off of the den, which is terrifying to watch, but it's something she's got to teach them how to do, which is how to land and not kill yourself.
Right. I can maybe I think probably my own mother could sympathize with some of those plights. Seeing me jump off of swing sets and things like that, and getting a little worried. But those are how small young animals develop motor skills. I did get a note, and I apologize for this, that there was a problem, a website problem with what we were when we were talking earlier. So we may have to back up just a little bit so people could hear some of the answers that we missed, or that I asked before. All right, so maybe we'll go back to right after the introduction. Okay. So Carole, could you please just tell us a little bit about Big Cat Rescue and its mission?
I had started rehabbing bobcats when I was 17, but in 1992, when I was in my 30s, we started rescuing captive cats. And it started with rescuing 56 cats off, first a single cat at an auction who was going to be killed by a taxidermist, and then 56 cats from a fur farm, 28 more cats from a fur farm, 22 more cats from a fur farm, and then people started calling and saying, would you take my lion? Would you take my tiger? And so we learned that there's this huge issue in America with people having exotic cats as pets. So we have provided a full-time permanent home to those animals, but we also work very hard to change the laws so that people can't get their hands on these animals in the first place.
It definitely does seem like a rewarding and challenging job. and you have a family of bobcats that you're caring for right now, along with several other big cats in your facility. Jamie, before we get into some of the nuts and bolts about how you rehabilitate bobcats, could you talk to us about the distinguishing physical characteristics of a bobcat? They are, fairly common across much of their range, but they're not an animal that people tend to see, in our day-to-day business. So what distinguishes like a bobcat from maybe your house cat, for example?
The distinguishing characteristics of bobcats include the short tail that's 4 to 6 inches long. They also have a spotted coat pattern and white ear flashes on the backs of their ears. They look a lot different than a typical house cat, but they are elusive, so we don't get to see them that often in the wild.
And what about their food? Like a house cat, they are basically like a generalist carnivore. But since their diet can vary so regionally, what might be like their major prey in your area of the nation in Florida?
In Florida, the main diet consists of the cotton rat, and they'll also eat reptiles, snakes, lizards, and bugs, even maybe some other small mammals, squirrels, and that sort of thing. But mainly here in Florida, they eat rats.
And in my area of the nation, in my neck of the woods in Western Washington, I've been reading that they often will focus their efforts on a large rodent, a medium-sized rodent that lives in this area called the mountain beaver. So they're not necessarily closely related to true beavers, the aquatic beaver, but a small rodent that is fairly abundant in some habitats. So they're going to take the opportunity to catch what they can find out in the environment. And there was even a video from a couple of years ago or last year of a bobcat going into the surf off of a beach in Florida and taking a small dogfish, I think, or a small shark out of the water. And that was kind of remarkable to see. So they are quite adaptable in their diet as long as it's an animal. Mm-hmm. And then you're also, of course, rehabilitating a family of bobcats right now. And before we discuss that, what is their mating season like? When is it, and how long does it take for them to raise their kittens to maturity?
Here in Florida, our temperatures allow for breeding to happen year-round. So we get orphans several different times of year. It doesn't tend to be one specific season here. But a mother will take care of their kittens for a year to a year and a half.
Whereas up north, where you are, they are typically breeding in the winter and then delivering in the spring, like most of the animals. And so that works out well that she's got young on the ground while there's young of other species on the ground to be able to hunt.
And you have how many bobcats in your facility right now that you're rehabbing and caring for temporarily?
Currently, we have 4 bobcats in rehab, and that includes the mom with her, or I'm sorry, 5, and that includes the mom with her 3 kittens.
And can you tell us just a little bit about where these individual cats came from? What was their story? What brought them to Big Cat Rescue?
Well, one of the orphans that we have right now, Alpha, do you remember her story?
I'm thinking she was the one that was found alongside a lake, and all those tourists were out there and found her.
The mama cat was actually trapped on a farm. She was a nuisance animal, and she gave birth in the trap, which is the first time we've ever seen something like that happening. So it was
we didn't know what to do.
Yeah, it was completely unexpected, but it has given us this opportunity to really learn a lot through observing her process.
And your goal, correct, is to release these animals back into the wild. And do you have like a certain timetable for the cats that you're caring for?
Each case is different. We get orphans, but we also get cats that were hit by cars. So it depends on how much physical rehabilitation they need before they get released. Almost all the cats are released in under 6 months from when they arrived. That's according to regulations here in the state of Florida. With the kittens, we want them to be able to be big enough and strong enough to follow their mom, because when they're released, they're going to a new territory where she's going to have to establish a new home. And it's important that the kittens are able to keep up with her during that time.
Because of the fact that she had been trapped and then had the kittens in the trap, and we feel like she probably had them early, she didn't have a chance to, pick out a den site and be ready for them. So that's why she couldn't be released right away, is because she had, well, for one, she was in a situation where she was considered a nuisance and they wanted her out of there or they were going to kill her. And two, because she can't find a place to raise her kittens safely when they were so dependent on her. So we want to give her that time to be able to take care of them, bond with them, get them up and running, and then get them back to the wild as quickly as we can.
So it must be challenging to care for these animals and prevent them from becoming dependent on people, or especially becoming just habituated to the presence of people. So how do you prevent the animals in your care from becoming reliant on people? There was actually something interesting that the webcam viewers saw this morning. Somebody going around one of the cages that you had the family of bobcats in, and they were wearing camouflage. So can you talk just a little bit about what some of the steps you might take to make sure that they don't become reliant on people?
And this is like the most important part of rehabbing kittens.
It is. So again, it's different case to case. When we get adult bobcats, they are really not interested in people at all. So we don't have to worry too much with them. They already have all the skills that they need.
But you're still really careful about.
Yeah, we don't talk around any of the rehabs. We don't want them to get used to our presence in that way. We don't make eye contact with them, really. We don't want them to try to form a bond with us. With the kittens, especially, we do wear those ghillie suits that make us look like a big walking tree. And we've developed a whole plan of hands-off feeding systems where we can provide food, but have it time delayed so that they're not associating us with giving them the food. So here it's really important to us that we do make sure that they don't bond to us or look to people for food, because we don't want them to be a nuisance once they're released.
So the only time you have maybe physical contact with the cubs is just during their veterinary checkups, is that correct?
Yes, we with this particular family, we've been weighing them every other week or so just to collect some data that'll help us age new orphans that come into the program. But yeah, we're completely hands off other than for veterinary purposes.
But sometimes we get orphans. Most of the time we get orphans that don't have a mom. And so there's a lot of things that you do to make sure that those babies, while they're nursing, are not bonding to people.
Yeah, in the past, when we've gotten orphans, we will solicit our domestic animal rescue groups, and we've actually gotten domestic moms that are nursing their own kittens, and we'll try to integrate an orphan bobcat with that family so that it grows up basically like a feral cat. It's not getting any attention from us, and it's associating at least a feline with being family.
Oh, fascinating. What other challenges or special considerations might you experience, during that time when you're rehabbing bobcats, whether from injury or orphans or just a family like you have right now?
There's so many ways this can go wrong.
Well, one of our biggest challenges is being able to observe the cats and what they're doing. So we want to make sure that a bobcat that had a broken leg that we did a repair to is walking around okay. So that's where these cameras come in to really help us out. We can look back at footage and see, how is their gait? Are they still limping? Are they able to hunt their own food? And again, that also applies to the orphans. We're able to watch them via these cameras and make sure that they're learning all the things that they'll need to survive in the wild.
And it's an expensive endeavor. Each one of our bobcat rehab cages cost over $65,000 to build. And then you've got the expense of all of the whole prey, which is a really expensive food item.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing cheap about it, but we want to have the best enclosures possible and the best programs in place to make sure that these bobcats are releasable and successful once they're in the wild.
And what what would you recommend people do if they find an injured bobcat or a kitten or that looks orphaned, no matter where they happen to be? I know in Florida there's probably specific steps, but what in general might people do?
I mean, it's hard.
It's hard to say that they're
Yeah.
really orphaned because they always look so scrawny and so sickly when they're in the wild.
And sometimes the mother may be moving a kitten from one place to another, and then they see somebody approaching and they might drop it and run off and hide in the bushes. So it's important to observe that kitten for a while and see if the mother comes back for it before intervening. But it's a very difficult, decision to make. What's the right one in that situation? Because it could also be that the mother was hit by a car and it truly is orphaned. So the best thing to do is observe it for as long as possible and make sure that there's not a mom coming back for it.
And there's been a number of times where someone has picked up a kitten and then called us. And so when we go to pick up the cat, what we do is we'll take the kitten out to the area where that person said that they had picked it up and set a carrier out with the kitten in there, and then we'll get in the car, because usually if you're in a vehicle, the wild animals don't seem to know that you're there for some reason. And so we'll listen for the longest time. I mean, we'll sit there for hours listening to see if the kitten is calling or if there's a mom calling. We've never been able to reunite a family, but that's always our first option or our first choice if we get that opportunity.
And before we get to some viewer questions, I do have a few final questions for you. Maybe we'll just reintroduce ourselves before we continue on. So again, if you're joining the chat just a little bit late, my name is Mike Fitz with Explore.org, and I'm joined by Carole Baskin and Jamie Veronica from the Big Cat Rescue, who do a lot of wonderful work to help rehabilitate and release bobcats back into the wild. So I'm just kind of curious about why you admire bobcats so much. I think wild predators in general have we can't connect with them very strongly. But what is it about bobcats specifically that draws your interest?
Bobcats I've always referred to as little lions because their personality is as big as a lion. The way that they act with each other or with strangers or even the keepers here in our captive situation, they're just so fierce, and that's very respectable of a tiny little cat like that.
And that's what I love about them. They are so independent and strong. And Jamie here is my daughter. She's been doing this work since she was 12 years old. And I tell everybody she was raised by bobcats.
So, Jamie, would you consider yourself a bit feral in that sense?
A little bit, yes. I don't make eye contact.
What could someone do to coexist with bobcats? They do live in suburban and urban areas as well. These are not just animals of the wilderness. So, what might people be able to do to coexist with them?
We field a lot of calls and emails from people that maybe saw a bobcat in their neighborhood. Every single neighborhood, for the most part, has some kind of conservation area within it, which is an area of forest that was set aside during the development process. So, of course, wild animals are going to live in that area, and there is opportunity to see those cats. But for the most part, they're nothing to be feared. They're going to run away from you. We consult people that want us to relocate a bobcat that they're afraid of. And a lot of times it can come down to having bird and squirrel feeders in your backyard. So if you're feeding prey animals, you're going to attract predators to your backyard. It's pretty straightforward.
And, I think now that so many people have like the Ring doorbell or they have outside cameras, they're capturing a whole lot more of the wildlife in their area that they had no idea was there before. So we get an awful lot of calls from people that are so concerned when they see that there's a bobcat in the neighborhood. And we always tell them that bobcats make horrible pets, but they're great neighbors because they're attracted to the rats. And anywhere you have people, you have rats. And so having those bobcats live in your neighborhood and take care of your rat problem is just a wonderful symbiotic relationship.
And if you wanted to see a bobcat in the wild, how would you recommend people go about that? I think it can be kind of a challenging endeavor, to say the very least.
I would say look up because they're in the trees. They're not on the ground.
Well, and there's you have pretty good chances of seeing bobcats in the wild at many of the parks that have hiking trails. You just have to go really early in the morning as day's breaking. There's several places that you can actually see the bobcats on trails like that. Because in those highly densely wooded areas, the wildlife like to use the paths. It's a little bit easier to get around from one place to another. So if you're first on a trail in the morning, you'll see lots of tracks.
And trails. They seem to, all wild animals, I guess, follow the same paths over and over again. So you'll see these little trails through the woods that are clearly made by small animals.
And one thing that I like to do if I'm hoping to see maybe a bobcat or a mid-sized predator like that is to sit in a place very quietly and pay attention to the behavior of their prey. So if you're seeing birds around you and all of a sudden the birds just start to kind of go crazy with their alarm calls, that means there could be something moving through like a coyote or a bobcat. So those are those signals to pay attention, because if you're a prey animal, you have to be almost hyper vigilant in a sense, because if you're not paying attention for just a few moments, that could spell disaster for you. And I do remember one memorable moment. I was camping in Pinnacles National Park, and it's just in the main campground there. And I was eating my dinner. It was pretty quiet. There were very few people in the campground. And I remember hearing the quail, all of a sudden, the California quail just start to go nuts. Like alarm calls, moving away, flying around. And I knew something was coming through. And I just sat there very quietly, and this bobcat walked right down the road in front of me. So that was quite a fascinating thing to see. But yeah, definitely look for what the other animals are doing. I think that's one of the more important tips that I can pass on to other people. And you can also look for their tracks too. When it snows around here, I love going out and looking for animal tracks, because that records a temporary record of what the animals are doing over the past, few days. So those are in Florida too. A lot of sandy areas are going to preserve those tracks as well. We do have, of course, a few more minutes left in the chat, and I know that there are definitely a few questions that people have thrown up in the queue. So, Carole, Jamie, would you want to try to answer those?
Sure.
All right. Let's see what we got here. Do you have a favorite, bobcat that you rehabilitated? Maybe there's one. Somebody's asking, just what do you have a favorite one? But is there one that really had a special story that you still think about today?
Absolutely. My favorite rehab bobcat has been Thor, and that's because he was the most stubborn of any bobcat we've ever rehabilitated. He had many very severe injuries when he came to us. His shoulder blade was shattered. His eye socket was fractured. He ended up having a lot of problems with his eye and lost vision in one of them. But I had a lot of one-on-one time trying to just get him to eat and take his medication in the first few days.
And that's always an issue.
So we can do all the repairs that we want, but the real issue is trying to follow up with the medications and the rest that they need in the hospital. And so I think at one point we just reached our exhaustion point with each other, and he started to work with me a little bit better. Not that he was tame, but he just decided he wanted to eat after a lot of different tactics. And so that felt like a huge win. But all through the rest of his rehabilitation, every single thing that a normal bobcat would do, he did the opposite. And it lasted all the way up until his release, where we opened the door, he walked out of the box, turned around, looked at me like he was going to tell me what was on his mind for the past couple months, and he didn't want to go away. He just wanted to have a stare down. So that's
it wasn't a friendly thing. He was like, "Oh."
That's definitely one that I'll never forget.
Yeah, that must be especially challenging. I think anyone who's ever tried to give medication to a domestic cat or a domestic dog knows that can be very, very challenging. And the cats and dogs will pull all kinds of tricks to not get their medicine down their throat. So working with a wild animal must be that turned up to 11, I would imagine.
And they don't even make tools for it. Jamie has had to actually construct tools in order to get the food into the cat's mouth. So she's got this really long stick with a plunger at the end, or the plungers at this end, where she can put the gruel in it and then plunge it into their mouth. And that was a big part of your thing with Thor. He was just like, no.
And are there any particular milestones that you're looking for with the Bobcat kittens in that family that you are currently raising?
Well, I don't know. Well, I mean, I guess the biggest thing the biggest opportunity for us with this family is to be able to observe the different steps that the mom takes to raise her young, so that we can incorporate those, tactics and learning opportunities into our program with orphans that'll come in the future. So right now we're getting so much information, and we're getting to see how they progress day to day, from coming out of the den for the first time and drinking out of the water bowl on their own for the first time. So now we're looking forward to seeing how she starts to train them to eat whole prey. So the weaning process from the mother.
Even though we've been doing Bobcat rehab since like the early 80s, it wasn't until 2003 that we ever felt like we could introduce a orphaned kitten back to the wild, because we just didn't feel like we had the capacity to teach that kitten everything that the mother would teach. And it was kittens having to live in a cage for the rest of their life. And so she went through all of this self-taught training to teach the cats how to hunt and how to stay away from people. But this is the first time that we've had the wild mother where we could actually observe how she does it, because we've never been able to observe that in the wild. So I think this is going to really improve the rehab program here. Even though it's the best one around, to my knowledge, it's still going to be just that much better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a wonderful learning opportunity. I mean, the mother Bobcat, she's the best teacher for her kittens, right? So anything that we can glean from her is, I think, going to be extremely valuable for you going forward. Somebody was wondering, and this is kind of on a slightly different topic, but if you're hiking and you encounter a bobcat, what would you recommend someone do?
I mean, it depends on proximity. Obviously, if you stumble across one right in your path, it would be best just to back up and give it its space. Because once you get enough space between you and the cat, it's going to feel comfortable enough to turn around and run away. But if you are seeing a bobcat from a great distance and it seems to be minding its own business, you can just sit back and kind of observe what's going to happen and what it's going to do. The biggest thing is just to give them their space.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. Almost all wild animals, all individual wild animals, all species, they just want room to themselves. So just give the animal room to go about its business. It's probably the best thing to do in those situations. And if you're so when you release a rehabbed bobcat, is there a chance that you're releasing it into a territory that's occupied by a bobcat already?
For sure. The territory is, in such high demand that there'll be several overlapping bobcat territories. But the good thing about bobcats is they're highly tolerant of transient bobcats. So they'll allow a bobcat to move through their territory and let them find their own. So that's one thing we don't have to really worry about when we're releasing, because they're pretty good with each other, and they'll let the other one move on, or they'll split their spaces.
And you usually work with places where it's, hundreds or thousands of acres.
Yeah, the sites that we use are extremely large, so they have abundant prey, and they can sustain multiple bobcats at each location.
And one final audience question. Mother's Day is coming up. So do you have any special Mother's Day plans to help raise money for Sky and her kittens?
Are you doing an email?
I hadn't planned on it. Jamie just got through doing a whole Mother's Day thing for our store at bigcatrescue.biz. Is there anything about Sky in there?
I don't think there is.
What a great idea, Mike.
Well, you must thank that person who's watching, because it wasn't my idea. So But if somebody did want to contribute to your effort, how would they do that?
In our gift shop at bigcatrescue.biz, we have a whole category dedicated to the rehab program. So there's different gift merchandise, t-shirts, and that sort of thing that helps support the program, but you can also do a donation there.
There's a really funny t-shirt in there. It says, "My Bobcat's in rehab."
Well, yeah, do definitely check out bigcatrescue.org. You can, of course, watch the live cams of their efforts on explore.org every day. Jamie and Carole, I would like to thank you for joining us this afternoon and lending your expertise and sharing that with the rest of the world. I know I learned a lot from browsing your website, watching your videos, reading about bobcats. So it's a fascinating experience for everybody who happens to be involved. And I think many people around the world are very appreciative of your effort to protect not only bobcats, but big cats wherever they happen to be.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And again, my name is Mike Fitz with explore.org. Thanks for joining us. Wherever you happen to be, have a good day, and we'll talk to you soon.